So I think we'll start there, and then if anyone's joining afterwards, then they sure can. It's absolutely great to be back. It's great to be starting off with the Health Talks again. I think it's a time where there's a lot of uncertainty for a lot of people, and I've picked that up with the online consults and the rest of those bits, that people still want this advice that I was giving out a lot over lockdown and trying to help people learn more about their health. And as I say, I've had a lot of requests over the last sort of 6 months. And so I've been considering it and when to bring it back and when was the right time. And I really think that now is the right time, both for me, having had a bit of a break from everything, and also for people that have been asking for it. So it's absolutely great to see you all on here. If there is anyone that new that's joining us, then as I say, it's an absolute pleasure to be bringing this to you, and hopefully you'll get a lot out of it. Always these things and these concepts are being presented with that thought that it's basically been built up over my clinical experience over the last 10 years in combination with the science that I've read and the things that I've kind of ideas that I've put together over that time. Now, if something doesn't resonate with you, then that's fine. I'm happy to have a dialogue with you about it afterwards. That's how we all learn, and that's what this is all about. And if it goes against something you've read, then by all means ask about that as well. If I'm able to answer it at the end, I will do. And if I don't feel able to, then I'll answer it another time on another talk. But as I say, yeah, great to see you all on here. And as I say, I've been looking forward to this. So without further ado, I will start. What our muscles can tell us. And I apologize for the spelling mistake already at the start. It's a good start, isn't it? So your physiology and your muscles have a huge effect on your psychology. And as you'll know, I always start with a quote, and this was a bit of a paraphrased one because I couldn't find the exact quote, but Tony Robbins, the motivational speaker, says something to this effect many times, and vice versa, really. And so, as I say, the effect that our position has on what we're thinking is well studied now, and even to the effect that if we smile, we actually know that we can bring more clarity and figure our way through problems a lot easier and fathom things out a lot easier. So as I say, these things are really important. And the way that our physiology and our muscles are working has a big impact on how we think and how we're able to react. And that's why we always put it at the base of the triangle. And again, if anyone's joining for the first time, you will see the functional health model in a moment and understand that a little bit better. But I really like this as a quote because, as I say, it kind of shows what we're talking about a little bit here, and coming from a completely different perspective in terms of someone that's working with people regularly in terms of their performance and the way that they are actually achieving things rather than from their health perspective. But it's great to see crossovers with those things. And I think always when you look at people that are working in elite ways, there very often is the biggest crossovers. We see that with elite sports and with people that are looking to get the best out of themselves in very high performing and very high stakes situations. We usually see that that's when they turn to these solutions that really do marry the physical, chemical, emotional, and sleep together, those pillars of health. So as some of you will remember, this is the functional health model. We start off with the physical structural. This is how the body's working, how we move it, those muscles, those nerves, how our systems are all working together. All of that is really such an important part of the physical kind of body and the way that we work with those things. We also have the chemistry. So that's everything that comes into your body, everything that goes out of your body, and of course, everything that your body is swimming in. Then we have the emotions, and that's, as I say, the thoughts and feelings, something that I've taken a big, deep dive into over the last 6 months. And so I'm looking forward to kind of, as I say, after we've developed this kind of idea of how the muscles are working, to actually start to talk to you about how those emotions work and what's actually happening from a biological standpoint and from the way that the chemistry is working in the body. It sounds like that can be a bit overwhelming and boring, but as always, I'll try and simplify it as much as I can so that you guys can have an understanding of what's happening when things happen. And that to me is something that's unfortunately missing a little bit from the way that we teach our children. And it's something that's I'm quite passionate about. And with my own kids, I'm trying to bring them into bit by bit, is to just understand a little bit about what's happening when we're thinking and what's happening when things are going on. And as I said, and if you can do that in a simple way from a young age, I think it's a great thing for people's health to actually be empowered about it and not feel like it's something that's the domain of someone else, that someone else has to understand all of this stuff for you. I think it's a big thing, because at the end of the day, it's you, and it's what it gives you the ability to do whatever you want to be able to do. Then we have the sleep in the middle, because that always helps us regenerate everything. But as anyone that's ever had any problems with sleep will know, the physical, structural, chemical, and emotional side of things can knock onto your sleep and have an effect on that as well. So all of these things are interdependent, and none of them can work on their own. I always say to people in clinic and on the online consults, I could help you in the best way in the world, physically and structurally. But if we don't address what's happening with the emotions and the chemistry and the sleep, then we may not well get a solution that we're looking for, and therefore, as I say, make you be able to do the things that you want to be able to do most in life in the best way possible. And then life is, as I say, that balance on top, and it never is in the middle. It's always going to be up and down, but it's about how we bring ourselves back to that equilibrium and that sort of peace as we go. The environment obviously feeds into that in a big way, in terms of the people that we hang around with, the places that we are, and even just what's actually around us. Sometimes I've seen people that have had problems with sleep that we've actually found out that they've been allergic to their pillow, for example. So environment in that way can also have an impact. We also have beliefs, which are not, there we go, they're coming up now. And beliefs are very important because they feed into all of this. And what you find is that big time feeds into the emotions and the chemistry, because our beliefs are like a driving system for how the rest of those things work. And so subconsciously, if something's working against us, then we always need to examine that and work that through. And that's something that I always do in both the online consults and when I work with people in clinic. And lastly, we have the whole bucket analogy. So I always talk about functional health and your neurology and the way that you adapt to things as like a bucket. So if you think people who get migraines, for example, people that get fatigued, people that have days that are just not working for them, very often it's because everything that's built up on us physically, chemically, emotionally has almost like spilt over from the bucket. And so, as I said, our job always is to try and help not just take down the bucket, the level of water in the bucket, but also to grow a bigger one over time. And the bigger bucket and the more adaptability that we have, then the better our functional health is. And therefore, we kind of don't slide towards, in that continuum of health, towards anything where we need emergency care or any of those things coming into there. Of course, some people will have traumas and different bits coming in, but it's always about making sure that we are as good as we can be in terms of our functional health. So muscles. So how many muscles are there in the body? Now, there's a question for you. I'll let you take a moment to ponder that one. So there's actually over 600 muscles in the body that we've named. There are some that there's some debate under, but as I said, yeah, over 600 for certain. So that may surprise you, and it may not, depending on how much probably time that you've spent talking to me about these things. And so, yes, I'd say over 600 named muscles. So things you may not know about muscles. Well, muscles make up about 50 to 60% of your total body weight. And that is pretty important if you think about it that way. It shows how much of you is covered in muscle. We don't always think about the muscles that are all over our face, for example, that allow us to make expressions. Some of the people that have Botox don't have to think about that because they've stopped some of them working. But yeah, you also have different muscles coming in through here. You've got all of your muscles going right throughout your body. You're literally covered in muscle. And and as you'll find out later through this talk, it's not just what you see on the outside. There very much is other muscles that are going on the inside that are having a big effect on our health and how our bodies work, and can tell us an awful lot about what's happening. And that's why I love working with muscles. I love using muscles as a window into the nervous system, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. So some facts about muscles. Water is important for all living things, as it says there. And so your muscles are made up of 79% water. Now that's a lot. And so if you think we want to make sure that we're not dehydrated, we want to make sure that we're actually working through. To put that in context as well, the body is very often quoted to be between 50 and 60% water. So it's even higher than the whole body itself in terms of the content. And as I said, if you think that that's how much they depend on water, then you will have a good idea of why we need some. And if anyone saw my talk on water previously, which I'll maybe do another one of, again, then they'll be well aware of that fact. The largest muscle in your body is actually the gluteus maximus, this big muscle that sits on your backside, right over your bum muscle, as you would know it. Very, very important muscle, and one that unfortunately gets less use when we're sat down. And so, as I said, walking, running, moving in lots of different ways and in as many different ways as we can helps us use those muscles. And because it's such a large muscle, it gives us such a big input in terms of how we're working through those things. Also works opposite our abdominals, so will help all sorts of things in terms of the way that we hold ourselves, in terms of the way our posture is, but also in terms of the way that we actually use our body for gait or the way that we walk. Also, a good fact about eye muscles. So anyone that's worked with me at all will know that I will very often check how eyes are moving. I very often do that with the first time that I meet patients, both in clinic and online. It's such an important window into those things. And if you look at this here, you'll start to understand a little bit about why. Eye muscles make up an estimated 10,000 coordinated movements in just an hour of reading. So that's quite a lot. Maybe you want to think about that next time you're sat down with a good book. And that's it shows why reading is a really good activity for us in terms of the brain and the rest of those things. It's, 10,000 movements just going through there with those eyes is quite something, really, when you put it into context like that. So on to what the three types of muscles are. So we have three different types of muscles in the body. The first is the one that you're probably most well acquainted with, which is the skeletal muscles, the ones that we often see and talk about training. The rest of those bits coming into that. We also have the smooth muscle, which is in almost all of our organs, apart from the heart, which we'll talk about in a moment, and helps in very often obviously ways that we aren't aware of. So there's lots of things going on in the background that we really aren't aware of. And one thing that's really quite fascinating about the smooth muscle of the gut is it takes about 44 hours for it to push all of the food, the average food that we eat around and out through our system. So it really has quite a lot of work to do, as I say, right in the background. And that explains why we need things like rest, digest, which is why I talk about a lot of the time about how if we've got this fight-flight system going on, we aren't digesting our food as well as we should be. That can, again, have a big effect on our physiology, but also a big effect on our psychology, as I talked about previously. You also have your cardiac muscle, which is much more like your skeletal muscle, but again, works independently. You can't control it, well, unless you're someone like Wim Hof, who's been training those things for a long time. But as I said, you really can't control it in the day-to-day as you're going about things that you're doing. And so those things they're really important to kind of recognize that there's those three types, but also that makes sense for why there are so many muscles in the body and what they're doing all the time, and also why they can give us such a big kind of a clue as to what's happening with people's health, even down to the fact that if the muscles are working harder in underneath the abdominals in some of this smooth muscle, then we can start to see signs of that, where we can see kind of inflammation. People might be a little bit puffy in their stomach, or they might be coming into there. And again, that's just where things are working harder. There's more blood flow. There's more of those bits coming into there. So again, something that muscles can give us a clue about. The eyes, as I mentioned before, and anyone that's seen my talk on eyes will know that the eyes they're just so important. And eye movements tell us so much. I mean, just to give another example from clinic, when I'm testing muscles, and again, when I'm on the online consults, when I'm getting people to show me how they are when they're marching, for example, a simple shift in the eyes can sometimes create a massive change in terms of how people are working and how people are working with their muscles. We can see shutdowns in their ability to use things just because their eyes are looking to the right or the left. And what I've started to see is that those things have a bit of a link to psychological things and things that people have actually experienced in the past as well. But again, as I said, studies for that are few and far between. This is more of my kind of my clinical experience and things that I think about as I'm going through, and have seen the amount of patients that I've seen over roughly, as I say, 10 years now. So muscles give us an amazing window into your body and nervous system, as I said, and they really do. So if you take, for example, if you've got someone that's in a very fight or flighty position, maybe they have been attacked or abused or something like that, and then they come into the clinic because they've got headaches, for example, or I see them online and they've got headaches. They might well be in a very kind of closed posture that they don't want to kind of open up through there. And that, as I said, will have a mirroring effect in their psychology as well. But we're well aware that the body just feels the need, and the brain feels the need to protect itself. Now, interestingly, I've also seen this with people that have had things like long COVID recently, where their body goes into this. And it might not be all the time. It might just be when they're talking about the things that are the biggest triggers for them, or the biggest problems for them. And so, as I say, as we go through these things, you start to kind of realize, wow, these people really come into those things. And we spend a lot of time, if you think about it, on computers and phones and things like that these days. And so that's a lot of coming in like this. It's a lot of internal rotation. It's a lot of flexion. So it's a lot of this. And if there's a lot of that going on, we need some of this. And so often we don't get enough of it. But the problem you get is that if you do so much of this, you start to think that actually this is what you want, because your muscles are just so used to that it just becomes habit. And so, as I said, so then what you get is you have a hard day at work. You've been sat like this. You might drive home from work, be sat like this. And then suddenly you get home and you just think, oh, I just want to flop on the couch and sit like this. But actually what your brain will want, and the rest of these things, if we're really honest with ourselves, is to open up through that. So things like opening up the shoulders in this way, things like opening up and using those glutes, going for a walk, doing different things like that. I'll talk through some things that we can also do in those ways. Just amazing ways to actually make sure that we get enough extension and that we start to counteract this and this, because this is exactly also what we do when we sleep, is we curl up. So we end up with these people that have just been like this for large amounts of the 24 hours that we're talking about. So yeah, so as I said, just something to think about is that we want to try and get a bit more extension in when we can and open up. And just something as simple as, say, bringing that elbow back, coming into that position, or stretching up, coming through, is just something to help you open up through. And sometimes that can be enough to change your physiology and change your thinking patterns about things as well. Because, as I say, as soon as your brain feels that you're more open and that you're not closed, you will actually start to think about things a little bit easier and less as if you're under threat. So that brings me to something called Sherrington's law. So that's every muscle has an opposite muscle, effectively, especially when we're talking about skeletal muscle and the way that those work. So biceps and triceps is the classic example, but there are many muscles that work in pairs like that. And if anyone's seen, when I'm working, if I'm saying, okay, well, this muscle's overworking, this one's underworking, and this one's trying to do that one's job. That's so often the essence of this stuff, is that the opposite muscle, if it's working too hard, will put so much pressure on this one. But the problem we have now is that we end up with a pain in, say, the bicep, and we attribute it to the bicep. But actually, the tricep can have a massive part to play in that, because if it's just constantly putting brakes on the bicep, that's going to be hard work for the bicep. So that's just an example of how these muscles work together. And as I say, it's something that we often see. And if we've got more of these muscles that are flexing, then of course they're going to be causing problems for the muscles that want to extend. So it's always about reading into these things and looking at it in terms of that physical, chemical, emotional sleep. And I'll give you a test in a moment to see how you find your muscles and the rest of those bits, so that you can start to think about that a little bit more. And if you are actually able to locate the muscles that you want to be able to, particularly those big glute max muscles as you're sat there. In actual fact, you can try that one now. If you just squeeze your buttock muscles as hard as you can on one side, and then the other, you should be able to switch between them. So you're kind of almost as if you were actually walking, like if you can see my screen, then we're doing that coming into there. And if you can squeeze one as hard as you can, you want to try and get it to the point where it feels like it might actually cramp, because that means that you've got such a muscle activity in there that you're well aware of where that muscle is. If you can't do that, then of course, let me know, because that's something that we need to work on. But also it's very important, as I said, to be able to just get that and really feel like you have such a capability of getting to those muscles, because the more your brain's able to access those muscles, the more it's going to see things happening way in advance of when they actually do. And so it's going to be able to switch on those muscles in the amount that you need, and the rest of those things. Now, it might not be, you might be a very well-trained person that's struggling to find that coming into that. And it's not because of a lack of training, it's usually because that muscle is actually too tense all of the time. So we can have a weak muscle, but we can also have muscles that are basically just turned on all of the time because we're in these tension modes. And as I said, and sometimes that can just be a local thing where your brain is a little bit paranoid about your hip. You consciously are quite happy with it, but your brain, for some reason, through some injury that you've had previously, has just decided that you need to protect that hip a bit more. And so we end up with this thing called arthrogenic inhibition, where the muscles don't actually work as well as they should do around the joints. And then we wonder why that ends up with an issue on the opposite side, for example. And then I always use the example of there's many people that have hip injuries and hip replacements that then actually get have to get the opposite one replaced right afterwards. And that's very often because they're just taking the pressure off of one side that's not working, they're putting it onto the other one. And then eventually when they actually get to that point where they've got that pressure on there, then that works that way. Just one more for muscles here. We also have these things called withdrawal reflexes, which are if you, for example, step on something, you want to pull your muscles up and away. And that's how those muscles work together as well. And you'll see here that they come in towards the spinal cord. Now, I don't want to get stuck too much on this today, because I just want to give you an overview of the muscles and what they're doing. And then, as I say, then we can start to talk about how the nervous system comes into it and the rest of it as we go through. But as I say, the biggest thing of all is just that there's a feedback loop effectively happening all the time. And some of these things are happening at such fast reflexes that they never actually get to the brain. They're just going straight to the spinal cord and back on a loop. Now, of course, the brain will find out about it, but it will find out about it much slower than if you need to take your foot away from a pin that it's just stood on. So as I say, those things are really important, and I'm always looking for those things as we work together, because when we're looking at reflexes that aren't working properly, people can start to walk and then suddenly think, hang on, you know what, this is not working for me the way it should do, or it feels much tougher than it should do. Because walking ultimately should feel like a quite easy activity, as like a pendulum when it's really going. But if something's getting in the way, it becomes a real drag because you're having to move all those muscles for yourself. And that makes it a little bit more difficult. And so as with everything in life, when we've got things working for us and when our technique is good, things become a lot easier coming through there, almost like systems, if you like. So what can you do before for yourself? Like I said before, you can try and tense these muscles, these different muscles. One good thing to do is just, if you're not really aware of the different muscles that are there, just Google muscles and have a look at the muscles of the body and see if you can just start tensing some of them up by the ways that, and you can, it says even when you Google these things, what those muscles do and which activities they have, and just try and tense them and see if you can find them. Just before you go walking, for example, it just helps your brain have that connection to those things. And so I'd say that's a really good thing you can do for yourself, and a really good like pattern break, especially muscles around the shoulders, the rest of those bits. Even if you just do some circles with your shoulders, there's so many muscles around here that's going to light up a different area of your brain. So sometimes if I get into a very stressed position, I'll just roll my shoulders a little bit, just coming in through these different ways, just to see if my perspective changes on it. And so as I say, it's a good thing to just kind of bear in mind that we want a bit of opening up and we want a bit of those things, but we also want that connection between the brain and the muscles and what they're doing. And if you find difficulty with those things, then let's say that's what it's all about for me, is growing that bucket and helping people to have a better physical health, a better chemistry, a better emotional health, and better sleep. And so those pillars of health are really right there for us. So as always, I don't believe anyone should have to live in pain. I believe everyone should be able to reach their potential and do the things that mean the most to them in life. If any of you know anyone that feels like they need help with that, then of course I'm more than happy to speak with them and see if I'm the right person to help them, and see if I can take them on as a patient, either online or in clinic here in Norway. As I say, it's an absolute pleasure to bring this to you. These are just a few pictures just to remind you. I always like the iceberg picture because I think it explains everything that we're talking about an awful lot. The bucket, as I said, just so crucial that we want to grow those buckets just coming through there. And apart from that, I will see you next week. And thank you for having the faith in me to attend these talks and for trusting me with your health. Now, there will be a slight tweak next week, unfortunately, because of, well, I say unfortunately, because of family commitments and because of the different things that are going on. I will be doing them weekly, but I'll be doing one every 2 weeks in the evening. And in the weeks in between, I'll be doing a lunchtime one. I will try and record these and then put them out eventually as well. And the plan is to put them out fairly soon after that, and then create the website that will help put those out as well. But as I say, at this moment in time, it's just about bringing you guys this information again, and I hope it's useful, and I hope that it helps you to understand a bit more about your health and a bit more about what your body is doing. Because I think that being empowered like that is just such a crucial thing to feeling like you can actually accomplish what you want to be able to accomplish in life. As always, as I say, free checks are available, and that's what I do is I look at those muscles to see which ones are overactive. We test balance, posture, and other aspects and see how we can release or stimulate those. And that's what I do in those in the full consult. I have the Norwegian stuck in my mind, sorry. But when we go through the full consults, then I'll say that's exactly what I'm doing, is I'm bringing those things through in that way and looking at all aspects of those functional health. But I always like to chat to someone before if they're unsure if I can help, or just to make sure that I am the right person to help them. As I say, if you have any questions in the meantime, just by all means, send me an email. It's robcooperchiropractor@gmail.com. Fantastic stuff. My absolute pleasure, guys. I'm great to hear that you like those bits. I can absolutely talk about tendons as well as the muscles. I hope I didn't want to kind of overwhelm you guys with too much information. So I hope that it didn't do that. This is such a vast topic when we start to talk about the body. So I'm always, if people have got something that they want me to add in or want me to talk more about, then as I say, I'm very happy to do so. I am quite keen because there's been a number of questions recently about emotions and how they work. But what I might do is just depart a little bit from the muscles and the rest of those things and go a little bit more into how emotions are working chemistry-wise and in terms of the neurology in the body. And then we can kind of come back around to how the body's working and how the muscles are working. Does anyone have any other questions about that at all? No, I think that's great. So as I say, great to see you guys. Look forward to seeing you next week if you can make it at lunchtime. If not, then as I say, it'll be an evening in 2 weeks' time that we will pick up the other one. And I will try and put recordings out there. I'll also try and get back to the health tips where we have small summaries of these bits and the most kind of the things that people think are the most interesting and the most helpful. I'll try and kind of put those out in the emails as well. But as I say, yeah, great to see you guys. So great to see people on here again, and great to be back. Actually, it's really nice to do them again. I can really feel very very pleased that I could bring them back. Actually, it's even more of a kind of an energy boost to me than I even thought it would be when I first started thinking about it again. So as I say, great to see you guys, and look forward to seeing you next week if you can make it. If not, in 2 weeks' time. Take care, and I will see you.